April 1945. The air above the Reich Chancellery in Berlin isn't just filled with the dust of shattered concrete. It's thick, choking, smelling of scorched leather and incinerated paper. Black ash falls like snow across the ruined courtyards. They aren't burning tactical maps or letters home. They are burning ledgers, medical registries, architectural blueprints, transit manifests. The bureaucracy of evil is frantically trying to erase its own arithmetic. They built a system that codified mass murder into standard operating procedure. And now that the empire is collapsing, they are desperately trying to destroy the evidence. But ash leaves a trace. The first classified secret they tried to burn didn't start with soldiers on a battlefield. It started with physicians in pristine white coats, codenamed Aktion T4. Before the vast extermination complexes in the East were ever built, the mechanics of mass death required clinical trials. They needed a testing ground. So doctors walked through hospital corridors, holding clipboards, evaluating the physical and psychiatric deviations of their own citizens. They didn't look at patients and see human beings. They saw a mathematical drain on state resources. They classified human life using a cold, purely economic metric, legally designating the disabled and the mentally ill as life unworthy of life. But they quickly realized that executing patients one by one via lethal injection was administratively inefficient. It took too much time. It was unnecessarily taxing on the medical staff. They required a scaled industrial solution. So they sealed the doors of standard hospital shower rooms. They pumped in carbon monoxide from heavily modified internal combustion engines and calmly recorded the exact duration it took for human lungs to fail. They calculated the lethal volume of gas required per cubic meter, the optimal thermal output for the crematorium ovens, the precise financial yield of gold extracted from dental fillings. T4 wasn't a medical program, it was a prototype, the calibration of a machine. But while T4 perfected the mathematics of erasure, another branch of the SS apparatus focused on something entirely different: the industrial fabrication of life. Destruction alone couldn't sustain a 1,000-year empire. They required biological superiority manufactured at scale. Enter the Lebensborn project. To the German public, it was presented as a charitable network, safe maternity homes for the wives of SS men and unwed mothers. In reality, it was a human breeding program governed by the exact same principles used in livestock agriculture. SS officers and meticulously vetted women were paired based on precise phenotypic criteria. Their lineages were audited back to the 18th century, ensuring absolute genetic compliance. They were attempting to reverse engineer a master race. But here's the thing about biological reproduction: it's slow, and the demographic quotas set by the High Command were incredibly aggressive. When domestic birth rates failed to yield the necessary volume of racially acceptable stock, the bureaucracy simply pivoted. They supplemented breeding with theft. Across occupied Eastern Europe, specialized SS units initiated a systematic campaign of biological harvesting. They evaluated hundreds of thousands of Polish, Russian, and Yugoslavian children. If a child possessed the correct cranial dimensions, the required pupillary hue, the optimal hair pigment, they were forcibly seized, ripped from their parents and routed through transit camps. Then came the brutal, clinical process of psychological erasure. Their original names were permanently deleted from all official registries. Forged birth certificates were issued. They were beaten for speaking their native tongues, forced to absorb fabricated German identities, and distributed to SS families as gifts of the state. It was the absolute commodification of human lineage. A child was no longer a person, they were an asset. The obsession with scale didn't stop at human genetics. As the Allied bombing campaigns began to systematically pulverize German surface industry, the Ministry of Armaments looked downward. They initiated the Third Classified Directive, a sprawling engineering anomaly hidden beneath the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia. They called it Project Riese, giant. And that designation? It was a severe understatement. What they attempted to construct wasn't merely a bunker. It was a fortified subterranean metropolis, a fully autonomous blast-proof nervous system for the surviving elite of the Third Reich. Think about the logistics mandated by those blueprints. They calculated the required excavation of over 3 million cubic meters of solid gneiss rock. That necessitated the continuous 24-hour detonation of high explosives, followed by the pouring of more concrete than was allocated to entire German cities. To supply the necessary mechanical force, they didn't rely on heavy machinery. They established a localized, highly efficient network of 13 satellite concentration camps. Tens of thousands of prisoners were driven into the deep shafts. They worked in absolute darkness, their lungs calcifying from silica dust, manually extracting the shattered stone until they collapsed. And when they did, they were immediately replaced by fresh transit arrivals, logged on a spreadsheet as raw, consumable material. The architectural remnants reveal a chilling physical ambition. Massive, interconnected caverns, some over 50 meters in length and 12 meters high, structurally reinforced with tens of thousands of tons of steel. They laid subterranean narrow-gauge rail networks. They bored vertical ventilation shafts hundreds of feet to the surface. But the most terrifying aspect of Project Riese isn't the concrete. It's the void itself. The sheer, empty volume of the excavated space. To this day, the definitive purpose of the complex remains a historical black hole. Was it the final decentralized command center for the High Command? A heavily shielded production facility for the Uranium Club's atomic research? Or a staging ground for the mass deployment of advanced biological weapons? We have the physical infrastructure, but we lack the operational context. As the Soviet vanguard approached, the retreating SS liquidated the primary labor force, executed the lead structural engineers, flooded the lower geological levels, and systematically collapsed the primary entrances. They sealed the mountain, leaving us with a monumental tomb of poured concrete and the haunting echo of an empire preparing to wage war from the abyss. But while carving mountains required millions of tons of steel, erasing a continent only required ink, paper, and the complete weaponization of agriculture. This was Generalplan Ost, the master plan for the East. It wasn't a chaotic manifestation of wartime anger. It was a highly structured, decades-long demographic blueprint curated by the Reich Security Main Office. They looked at the vast, fertile expanses of Ukraine, Western Russia, and Poland, and they didn't see sovereign nations. They didn't even see people. They saw Lebensraum, living space. The primary operational obstacle to this vision? A pre-existing population of over 45 million human beings. The bureaucratic solution was elegant in its cold, calculating mathematics. They called it the Hunger Plan. They didn't intend to rely on mass executions to clear the land. Bullets were expensive. Instead, they weaponized the food supply. Senior economic planners sitting in comfortable, well-lit Berlin offices calculated the exact caloric deficit required to starve 31 million people to death over 12 to 18 months. They reduced the eradication of entire cultures to a simple spreadsheet. The logistics were precise. Every grain of wheat, every head of cattle, every single calorie harvested from the black soil of Ukraine was earmarked exclusively for the German domestic market and the Wehrmacht. They deliberately planned to sever the flow of food to the massive urban centers of the East, effectively turning entire metropolitan areas into closed, sprawling starvation chambers. It was a calculated, ecological siege. They predicted with absolute medical accuracy how many weeks the human body could endure on 200 calories a day before the organs simply failed. They knew exactly when typhus would break out in the crowded, starving cities. They anticipated the precise breakdown of social order. Genocide via administrative decree. The fields would keep producing, the trains would keep moving west, and the soil would be systematically cleared of its inhabitants to make room for model German agrarian colonies. They used the natural cycle of harvest and hunger as a weapon of total demographic destruction. By May of 1945, The military apparatus of the Third Reich was entirely pulverized. The cities were reduced to ash. But the architects? The men who engineered T4? The directors of Lebensborn? The accountants of Generalplan Ost? You might assume they perished in the rubble of the empire they built. They didn't. They understood that the physical war was lost, but their personal survival was merely a matter of logistics. They initiated the fifth classified secret, the Ratlines. They didn't flee in a chaotic panic. That wasn't their way. They utilized a meticulously organized intercontinental smuggling network. They recognized that the post-war European landscape was flooded with millions of displaced refugees, creating a massive, untrackable administrative blind spot. And they exploited this chaos with the exact same bureaucratic precision they had applied to mass murder. Senior SS officers and concentration camp commandants quietly stripped off their uniforms. They secured highly sophisticated forged identity papers, adopting the names of deceased civilians or fictitious stateless persons. They moved through established smuggling corridors down the Tyrolean Alps, slipping into the port cities of Italy, specifically Genoa and Rome. And here is where the true logistical brilliance of the Ratlines manifested. They exploited the international humanitarian infrastructure. Sympathetic clerics, embedded deep within the Vatican and motivated by an intense anti-communist paranoia, provided them with safe houses and crucial networking. Through these ecclesiastical channels, high-ranking war criminals systematically applied for and received legitimate Red Cross travel passports. Think about that. They weaponized the bureaucracy of mercy. With perfectly validated transit documents in hand, they boarded commercial ocean liners bound for South America. Argentina, Brazil, and Chile offered vast geographical cover and politically accommodating regimes. The men who engineered the deaths of millions didn't spend their remaining decades cowering in dark caves. They lived in quiet suburbs. They managed automotive factories. They drank espresso in public cafes. Global justice wasn't thwarted by some brilliant military stand. It was defeated by clerical errors, stamped visas, and a highly coordinated transfer of paperwork. The architects simply vanished. We want to believe that when the Reich Chancellery fell, the horror ended, that when the files burned, the machine burned with them. But history doesn't offer clean resolutions. The blueprints of T4, Lebensborn, and Generalplan Ost proved something terrifying. Human morality isn't a natural law. It's a fragile construct, easily dismantled by logistics and state-sanctioned hatred. Fascism doesn't start with underground megastructures or death camps. It starts in quiet, well-lit offices. It starts when human beings are reduced to disposable numbers on a ledger. When a society silently agrees that the vulnerable are a burden rather than a responsibility. We don't study this darkness to despair. We dissect it to arm ourselves. We have to recognize the math of mass erasure before it is ever put into practice again. Protecting our shared empathy requires relentless, uncomfortable vigilance. If you want to understand the cold mechanics of the past, if you want to ensure these warnings are never ignored, subscribe to the Unsung. We will keep turning the pages they desperately tried to burn. They showed us exactly how the machine works. Make sure it never gets turned on again.